This is the story of Johnny Tremain by Esther Forbes. Another fabulous video so you can hear the story. It's illustrated by Lynd Ward and published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. And today I'm going to be reading chapter 10, Disperse Ye Rebels. And here's this great picture. And just to kind of review what had happened, the last section, rough reading for me, hard to get through, section 5, is where Johnny is taking the horses out through the British regiments, and because he's usually doing Dove's work for him, and he's riding Sandy and Nan, who are the other two horses that the British soldiers used, Lieutenant Stringer and his cohort. And so Johnny's like, oh gosh, these horses are so tame and everything is so easy. And so he's in the midst of the British soldiers when he notices something down by the water, that they are having a firing squad. And he's like, whoa, this is not good. So there are thousands of British soldiers around him. And he's trying to figure out who is the deserter. And then he sees his own blue smock that his mother had made for him, and it is Pumpkin. And Pumpkin, the poor British soldier kid who was working at the lights, who had exchanged his musket for the smock so he could run off and become a farmer, he was caught. And so it's really just devastating, and Johnny is kind of broken up about it. So let's jump in. Disperse, ye rebels. The 14th of April, 1775, General Gage had sent out spies dressed as Yankee men looking for work. The spies came back on this day. All the colonels were at the Province House with General Gage, listening to their reports. Joseph Warren knew this, and so did Paul Revere, even Johnny Tremain. It was easy enough to find out that spies had returned, were reporting to the commanding officer. But what had they reported? This was not known. The 15th of April. This fell upon Saturday. At every regimental headquarters, the same general orders were posted, signed by Gage himself. All the grenadier and light infantry companies were to be taken off duty until further orders. They were to be taught some new evolutions. Johnny himself read these orders posted in the lower hall at the Afric Queen. One man was grumbling. New evolutions. What was Grandma Gage thinking about? But Lieutenant Stringer, as he read, whistled and laughed. That, he said, looks like something at last. Each regiment had 2 companies picked and trained for special duty. The light infantry were the most active and cleverest men in each regiment. Lieutenant Stringer was a light infantry officer. These men were lightly armed and did scout and flanking work. Flanking being like your sides, and scout would be like going out to check the lay of the land, like looking for the enemy so that you can set up your troops in the best way to attack. In the grenadier companies, you found tall, brisk, powerful fellows, hard-fighting men, always ready to attack. If you have 11 regiments and pick off from each its 2 best companies, it adds up to about 700 men. All day, one could feel something was afoot. Johnny read it on Colonel Smith's florid face. He was stepping across the Queen's stable yard very briskly and remembering to pull in his paunch. That means your fat belly. There was ardor in his eye. Was it martial ardor? Lieutenant Stringer was so happy over something, he gave Dove 3 pence. He's like tipping him. Spring had come unreasonably early this year. In the yard of the Afric Queen, peach trees were already in blossom. Stringer was so happy something was bound to happen. Over on the common, Johnny found Earl Percy's regiment unlimbering, polishing 2 cannons. The soldiers were forming a queue about a grindstone, sharpening their bayonets. What of it? They were always doing things like that. Did all this mean something or nothing? He went to Mr. Revere's, whose wife told him to look for him at Dr. Warren's. The two friends sat in the surgery making their plans and listening to reports that were coming from all directions. Seemingly, the excitement among the officers, the preparations among the soldiers, had been noticed by at least a dozen others. But where were they going? Who would command them? No one knew. Possibly only Gage himself, although before the start was actually made, he would have to tell his officers. So it's like they're keeping everything on the down low. All that day, the British transports had been readying their landing boats. This might mean men would be taken aboard, move off down the coast, as Salem had been invaded 2 months before, or that they were standing by merely to ferry the men across the Charles River, land them in Charlestown or Cambridge. The work on the boats suggested that the men would not march out through the town gates. And yet, Gage might have ordered this work done merely to confuse the people of Boston, blind them to his real direction. The talk at Dr. Warren's went on into the night. Johnny relaxed on a sofa in the surgery as the men talked. He was ready to run wherever sent, find out any fact for them. It was past midnight. He would not have known he had been asleep, except that he had been dreaming. He had been hard at work down on Hancock's Wharf boiling lobsters, he and John Hancock and Sam Adams. The lobsters had men's eyes with long lashes and squirmed and looked up piteously. Hancock would avert his sensitive face to their distress. "Go away, please." But he kept pushing them under with his gold-headed cane. This is all a dream. Sam Adams would rub his palms and chuckle. Johnny woke up and realized that only Revere and Warren were still in the room, and they were talking about Hancock and Adams. These two gentlemen had left Boston in March. They were representatives at the Provincial Congress at Concord. The British had forbidden the General Court to meet, but the Massachusetts men had merely changed the name of their legislative body and gone on sitting. But did the British know that both these firebrands were staying at the Clarks out in Lexington? "It will do no harm to warn them," Revere was saying, getting to his feet. "I'll row over to Charlestown tonight, go to Lexington, and tell them a sizable force may soon move. They had best hide themselves for the next few days. And get word to Concord. The cannons and stores had best be hidden. Of course. Tell them we here in Boston have the situation well in hand. The second the troops move, either on foot or into those boats, we will send them warning in time to get the Minutemen into the field. I'd give a good deal to know which way they are going. But suppose none of us can get out. Gage knows we'd send word if we could. He may guard the town so well it will be impossible." Johnny was still half awake. He yawned and settled back to think of those lobsters with eyes like men, long lashes, tears on their lashes. Revere was pulling on his gloves. "Colonel Conant in Charlestown, I'll tell him to watch the spire of Christ's Church. You can see it well from Charlestown. If the British go out over the neck, we will show 1 lantern. If in the boats, 2. And come hell or high water, I'll do my best to get out and tell exactly what's acting. But I may get caught on my way over. Another man should also be ready to try to get out through the gates." I hope this is sounding familiar, because we have read about this before. They talked of various men and finally pitched upon Billy Dawes. He could impersonate anybody, from a British general to a drunken farmer. This might help him get through the gates. As Paul Revere, with Johnny at his heels, left Warren's, a man emerged from the darkness, laid a hand on Revere's arm. In the little light, Johnny recognized the rolling black eye, poetic negligence of dress. It was Dr. Church. "Paul," he whispered, "what's afoot?" "Nothing," said Revere shortly, and went on walking. "The British preparing to march?" "Why didn't you ask them?" The queer man drifted away. Johnny was surprised that Revere would tell Church nothing, for he was in the very inner circle. Seemingly, Revere himself was surprised by his sudden caution. But I can't trust that fellow. Never have, never will. I'm going to continue because section 2 is not too long. The 16th of April. All over Boston, bells were calling everyone to church. As though they had not a care in the world, the British officers crowded into the Episcopal churches, and army chaplains held services for the soldiers in the barracks. Paul Revere was over on the mainland, carrying out his mission. Boston looked so usual and so unconcerned. Johnny began to wonder if they all had not made mountains of molehills, imagined an expedition when none was intended. But Rab was so certain the time was close at hand that he told Johnny that he himself was leaving Boston for good. There would be fighting before the week was out, and he intended to be in it. Now he must report at Lexington. Johnny took this news badly. He could not endure that Rab should leave him, desert him. But as soon as the first shot is fired, no man of military age can possibly get out of Boston. They'll see to it. It's now or never. He did not seem to feel any grief at abandoning Johnny, who sat disconsolately on his bed watching Rab. The older boy was cutting himself a final piece of bread and cheese. How many hundreds of times Johnny had seen those strong white teeth tearing at coarse bread. Rab had been eating bread and cheese all through their first meeting, and that was long ago. It seemed he'd be eating bread and cheese to the end. There was a sick qualm at the pit of Johnny's stomach. He couldn't eat bread and cheese, and it irritated him that Rab could. The older boy was glowing with good health, good spirits. He was 18, 6 feet tall, and a grown man. He looked it as he moved about the low attic, stuffing his pockets with extra stockings, rolling up his shirt in a checkered handkerchief. He is leaving me, and he doesn't care, thought Johnny. Perhaps I'll go too, he offered, hoping Rab would say, I'd give everything I've got, even my musket, if you could come. Or merely, fine, come along. But instead, here's what Rab says. No, you can't, said Rab. You've got your work to do right here in town. You stick around with your fat friend Dove. Gosh, I'm glad I'll never have to listen to Dove again. But you'll have a fine time with Dove while I cannot stomach Dove. No, I thought he and you were getting on fine together. And there's not one reason why I can't leave for Lexington too, except you don't want me. He knew this was not true, but he could not help badgering Rab, trying to make him say, I'll miss you as much as you'll miss me. Rab laughed at him. He was going to leave, and he wasn't going to be slopped over. Johnny was gazing at him sullenly, sadly. Rab took the extra stockings from his pocket, untied his handkerchief, and added them to his shirt and other necessities. You want to go, Johnny accused him. Yes. Well then, go. I'm going fast as I'm able. Oh, Rab, have you ever seen those little eyes at the end of a musket? Rab, don't you go, don't you go. Notice this is not in quotes. These are Johnny's thoughts, not his words. He is not saying this part right here. He is wishing that Rab would stay. Rab was singing under his breath. It was the song of the Lincolnshire poacher that Mr. Revere had taught Johnny, and Johnny had taught Rab. There was something about Rab's singing, low, a little husky, and not too accurate, that always moved Johnny. It was a part of that secret fire which came out in fighting, taking chances, and dancing with girls. The excitement glowed in Rab's eyes now. He was going into danger. He was going to fight, and the thought made some dark part of him happy. Johnny wanted to tell him about those eyes, but instead he said, I guess you really want to get out to Lexington and do some more dancing. Here's hoping. From then on, Johnny said nothing, sitting glumly on his bed, his head bowed. Then Rab came over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. Goodbye, Johnny. I'm off. Johnny did not look up. "You're a bold fellow, Johnny Tremain." He was laughing. Johnny heard Rab's feet going down the ladder. The door of the shop closed after him. He ran to look out the window. Rab was standing outside the Lauren house, shaking hands with his uncle, saying goodbye like a grown man. Now he was bending down to kiss Aunt Jennifer, not at all like a small boy kissing an aunt. He picked up Rabbit, who could toddle about, and kissed him too. Then, half running, he passed lightly up Salt Lane and out of sight. One moment too late, Johnny ran out into the alley. He couldn't let Rab go like that. He had not even said, "Good luck. God be with you." Why, he might not ever see Rab again. He went back to his garret and flung himself on his bed. He half wished he might cry, and was half glad he was too old for tears. Today there was no sound from the shops and wharves, no cry of chimney sweep, oysterman, knife grinder. The town was whist and still, for it was Sunday. As Johnny lay upon his bed, the church bells began to call for afternoon service. They babbled softly as one old friend to another. Christ's Church in Cockrell, Old South, Old Meeting, Hollis, King's Chapel. He knew every one. He had heard them clanging furiously for fire, crying fiercely to call out the Sons of Liberty. He had heard them toll for the dead, rejoice when some unpopular act had been repealed, and shudder with bronze rage at tyranny. They had wakened him in the morning and sent him to bed at night, but he never loved them more than on Lord's days, when their golden clamor seemed to open the blue vaults of heaven itself. You could almost see the angels bending down to earth, even to rowdy old Boston. "Peace, peace," the soft bells said. "We are at peace." Suddenly, close by, over at the Afric Queen, trying to be so serious and the lights go out. Over at the Afric Queen, the British drumsticks fell. The fifes struck up, toot, toot, toodly-toot. Even on Sunday, they were out drilling. So were the other men, even on Sunday. For instance, over in Lexington. The 16th of April drew to a close. Monday was a quiet day. Lieutenant Stranger looked very solemn. Maybe there was not to be an expedition after all. And that's the end of section 2 and the end of this video. Click subscribe and come back again for more of Johnny Tremain and math videos. Bye now.